Someone is going to say something to you today that is designed to knock you off balance. Maybe they already have. A comment that stings, a challenge you didn't see coming, a moment where your mind went blank, and hours later, in the shower, you thought of exactly what you should have said. The Stoics had a name for that feeling. They called it being conquered without a sword. But what if you never had to feel that again? What if, instead of scrambling for words, you had 7 responses so calm, so precise, so philosophically grounded, that they didn't just answer the person in front of you, they silenced the noise inside you? That's what this video is. Stay with me. Welcome back to Wisdom of the Stoics, the place where ancient philosophy meets the battles of modern life. If you're new here, I want you to know something before we go any further. This channel is not about feel-good advice. It's not about quick fixes or hollow affirmations. What we do here is go into the original texts, the meditations of Marcus Aurelius, the letters of Seneca, the discourses of Epictetus, and we pull out the philosophy that actually works, the kind that has survived 2,000 years, precisely because it was built for the hardest moments a human being can face. Today is one of those moments, and before we get into the 7 responses, I want to ask you something honest. When was the last time someone's words, one sentence, maybe even just one word, completely derailed your day? Take a moment. Think about it, because I think the answer tells us everything about where our true work begins. Before we get to the 7 responses, we need to understand something foundational, something the Stoics understood that most people today have completely forgotten. Words are not weapons unless you hand someone the sword. Epictetus, the man who was born a slave, who had his leg broken by his master as a demonstration of power, who had every reason to be a victim of other people's words and actions, wrote this in his discourses. Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things. Read that again. Men are not disturbed by things. They are disturbed by their opinions about things. This is not a motivational slogan. This is a radical claim about the architecture of human suffering. Epictetus is saying the words someone throws at you are neutral events. What creates your pain? What makes your face flush, your hands shake, your sleep disappear, is not the word. It's the story you build around the word the moment it lands. Marcus Aurelius, writing to himself in the privacy of his journal, a journal he never intended anyone to read, put it this way: you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Now, and this is important, the Stoics were not saying that other people's cruelty doesn't matter. They were not saying words have no impact. Seneca wrote entire letters about the wounds language can leave. What they were saying is this: the wound and the response to the wound are 2 completely different events, and only one of them is yours to control. The 7 responses in this video are built on that distinction. They are not clever comebacks. They are not verbal weapons. They are philosophical positions, each one rooted in Stoic thought, that allow you to meet any attack, any provocation, any attempt to destabilize you from a place of complete interior calm. Let's begin. Response 1. I may be wrong. 3 words, and I want you to sit with the discomfort of them for a moment. Because your first instinct, almost everyone's first instinct, is that saying, I may be wrong, is an act of weakness. The Stoics believed the exact opposite. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, commander of legions, the most powerful man in the known world, wrote this in his meditations. If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change. He wasn't performing humility. He was practicing one of the most demanding Stoic disciplines, the recognition that our perception is always partial, always filtered through ego, always shaped by what we want to be true, rather than what is true. The Stoics had a word for the faculty that generates false certainty: fantasia, the impression, and they taught relentlessly that untested impressions are the source of almost all human error. Here is the Stoic insight that makes I may be wrong so powerful. The person attacking you is trying to provoke your ego. They want you defensive. They want you contracted. rigid, fighting. Because a person fighting to protect their ego is predictable, manageable, and ultimately weak. But when you say, I may be wrong, genuinely, calmly, without performance, you remove the target they were aiming at. You give them nothing to push against. And you simultaneously signal something that unsettles every aggressor. I am not afraid of being wrong, which means I am not afraid of you. There's a story about Epictetus being confronted by a student who argued loudly and aggressively that Epictetus's teaching was inconsistent. Instead of defending himself, Epictetus reportedly smiled and said, "You may have found an error I haven't. Tell me more." The student, expecting resistance, had none to push against. The argument dissolved. The Stoic principle at work here is called oikeiosis, belonging or affiliation with truth over self. When you affiliate with truth rather than ego, you become genuinely undefeatable, because you've already agreed to surrender anything that isn't accurate. Think about someone in your life right now who makes you feel defensive. What would happen if the next time they challenged you, your first internal question was, could they be right? I want you to actually sit with that, not as defeat, as philosophy. Response 2, silence. Not a response, you might say, and you'd be wrong. You might say that you have to say something. Seneca wrote in one of his letters to his young friend Lucilius, retire into yourself as much as you can. Associate with those who are likely to improve you. Welcome those who you are capable of improving. The process is mutual, for men learn while they teach. But buried in that same letter is a warning that most people miss. Avoid those who are despondent and who groan over everything. And his method of avoidance was not argument. It was withdrawal. The Stoics understood something that modern psychology has since confirmed. Not every provocation deserves a response. And sometimes silence is the most devastating thing you can offer. Here is why silence works so profoundly as a Stoic response. When someone attacks you verbally, when they try to diminish you, embarrass you, provoke you, they are, consciously or not, seeking an energy transaction. They want something from you. Your fear, your anger, your scrambling justifications. That energy is what feeds the exchange. Silence starves the attack. Not cold silence. Not pouting silence. Stoic silence, which is something entirely different. It is the silence of someone who has looked at what was just said, evaluated it, and simply found it insufficient to require a response. Marcus Aurelius practiced what he called prosauche, self-attention, or watchfulness. Part of that practice involved noticing the impulse to respond immediately, to fill every silence with self-defense, and asking, does this moment require my voice or my presence? In his meditations, he writes, how much more grievous are the consequences of anger than the causes of it? He had experienced this himself. As emperor, he was constantly surrounded by people who wanted his reaction, senators who baited him, generals who tested him, philosophers who challenged him publicly, and time and again, the historical accounts show the same thing. Marcus paused before he spoke. Often, he did not speak at all. The ancient world had a name for this quality. They called it megalopsychia, greatness of soul, and it was identified specifically with the ability to remain unmoved when lesser people expected movement. Here is the practical truth. When you respond immediately and emotionally, you show someone exactly which buttons work. You give them a map, but when you meet their provocation with measured silence, or the briefest, calmest possible acknowledgement, you reveal nothing. You remain. As the Stoics would say, free. I'll say this only once, and I mean it sincerely. Some of the most powerful people I've ever observed had almost nothing in common, except this. When challenged, they did not rush to speak. The silence was the answer. Response 3. That's an interesting perspective. This response requires the most philosophical discipline of all 7, because it asks you to do something genuinely difficult, to engage without evaluating, to acknowledge without agreeing, and to remain in contact with someone's reality without being pulled into it. Epictetus, in the Enchiridion, his handbook of Stoic practice, opens with the foundational distinction that underlies everything we're talking about today. Some things are in our control and others not. That's an interesting perspective, is the linguistic expression of that distinction. Here is what it does not say. It does not say you agree. It does not say you disagree. It does not say the other person is right or wrong, wise or foolish. It takes no position whatsoever on the content of what was said. What it does say is this: I have heard you. I have clocked the existence of your view, and I am choosing, deliberately, not to make it my problem. The Stoics were fascinated by the phenomenon they called sympathia, the interconnectedness of all things. But they were equally fascinated by its opposite challenge, the way we unconsciously absorb other people's emotional states, their judgments, their anxieties, their certainties. They called this absorption patha, the passions or disturbances that come not from within, but from without. That's an interesting perspective, is a firewall. It creates what Epictetus called diastema, distance, interval, space between the impression and the response. Now, and I want to be precise about this, this response must be genuine, to be Stoic. The Stoics had no time for performance or manipulation. If you say, that's an interesting perspective, while internally seething, you've learned nothing. The point is to mean it, to genuinely position yourself as someone who finds the diversity of human opinion interesting rather than threatening. Marcus Aurelius returned to this theme repeatedly in his meditations. He was surrounded by people whose opinions he found wrong, whose behavior he found troubling, whose politics he found corrosive, and yet he wrote, again and again, exercises in genuine curiosity about what drove those people. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own. He didn't say tolerate wrongdoing. He said recognize the shared humanity. Find it genuinely interesting that people arrive at such different places from the same starting point. That's an interesting perspective, means when a Stoic says it. It means, I see you as a human being, arriving at a conclusion through a process I can examine without threat. Leave a comment below. I genuinely want to know, what is a situation in your life right now where that's an interesting perspective would completely change the dynamic? I read every comment on this channel. Tell me. Response 4. Let me think about that. We live in a culture that has made speed into a virtue. Respond instantly. React in real time. Never let a moment pass without filling it with your opinion. The Stoics looked at this tendency 2,000 years before Twitter, 2,000 years before the comment section, and they identified it as one of the most reliable paths to hamartia, error, the missing of the mark. Seneca wrote, I will keep constant watch over myself, and, most usefully, will put each day up for review. The daily review, the exam, that became a cornerstone of Stoic practice, was built on a single premise. Time reveals what haste conceals. Let me think about that. Does several things simultaneously, all of them Stoic. First, it honors the Stoic commitment to logos, reason, the rational faculty that distinguishes us from animals, and that the Stoics believed was our most divine attribute. To rush a response is to let the lower faculties, impulse, ego, emotion, speak before reason has assembled itself. Second, it signals to the other person something genuinely disarming. You take them seriously enough to think about what they've said. This is not weakness. It is respect that most people are completely unprepared to receive, especially when they were expecting a fight. Third, and this is the subtlest Stoic point, it buys you the space to practice what Marcus Aurelius called hypomone, patient endurance, the willingness to sit in the discomfort of not having an answer yet without needing to escape that discomfort with noise. There is a remarkable account from the historian Cassius Dio about Marcus Aurelius presiding over legal disputes. Unlike many emperors who were known for quick, decisive, often capricious judgments, Marcus was known for asking follow-up questions, requesting time, consulting precedents, and sleeping on decisions before rendering them. His contemporaries sometimes found this maddening. History has vindicated him entirely. In your own life, this response transforms confrontations. Because the moment you say, "Let me think about that," and mean it, you've shifted the conversation from a battle to a negotiation, from heat to light. I'll be honest with you, this one required the most work. For me personally, to internalize the instinct to respond immediately, to prove you've already considered something, to never appear caught off guard. That instinct is deeply human, and it is. The Stoics would tell us, deeply unhelpful. The 4 words, "Let me think about that," are an act of intellectual courage, not retreat. Response 5. You might be right. Notice the difference between this and response 1. Response 1 was, "I may be wrong," an inward acknowledgement of your own fallibility. This response, "You might be right," is the outward expression of something even harder, genuine openness to the other person's position. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, taught that the highest expression of rational virtue was not winning arguments. It was arriving at truth. He reportedly held that a philosopher who enters a debate hoping to win rather than hoping to learn has already failed philosophically, regardless of what happens in the debate. "You might be right" is powerful for a reason that has nothing to do with strategy and everything to do with the nature of truth itself. When you say it, genuinely, calmly, without agenda, you model what the Stoics called eunoia, goodwill, the sincere desire for the other person's thinking to illuminate something real, and people can feel the difference between that and performance instantly. It is also worth noting, what you might be right does not mean, in Stoic terms, it does not mean capitulation. It does not mean agreement. It means, I am holding your position open as a live possibility rather than a threat. Seneca wrote, "The first step in becoming good is to want to be good." The parallel in dialogue is this: the first step in having a real conversation is to want to be changed by it. If you enter every exchange already decided, you are not conversing, you are performing. And the Stoics had no patience for performance, dressed as philosophy. Here is something I want you to genuinely sit with. The last time someone convinced you of something, when did it happen? And what made you open to it? I will wager that in almost every case, it wasn't the force of their argument that moved you. It was the feeling that they respected you enough to genuinely want you to understand that they were not trying to defeat you. They were trying to reach you. "You might be right" is how you give someone that feeling, even in the hardest of conversations. Response 6. This doesn't require my reaction. Now, this response is rarely spoken aloud. It is primarily an internal response, a Stoic intervention you perform on yourself. In the half-second before you open your mouth and say something you'll spend hours regretting, but sometimes, said calmly, without drama, without cruelty, it can be said, and when it is, it carries enormous power. Epictetus returned obsessively to the concept of prohairesis, the faculty of choice, the will, the part of you that decides what to engage with and what to let pass. He considered prohairesis the very essence of human freedom. Everything else, your health, your reputation, other people's opinions of you, even your life, he placed in the category of taiktos, external things, things not ultimately yours to control. This doesn't require my reaction is an act of prohairesis. It is you exercising the one freedom that no one can ever take from you, the choice of what to give your energy to. Marcus Aurelius put it in military terms, because that was the frame he understood. You can commit injustice by doing nothing. But he balanced this constantly with another insight: the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Not every obstacle is meant to be fought. Some obstacles are tests of your ability to recognize them as not your battle, not your weight, not your problem. There is a scenario I want you to imagine. A colleague says something dismissive of your work in front of others. Your face flushes, your heart rate goes up. Every instinct says, defend yourself, explain, push back, make them look wrong. The Stoic looks at that cascade of instinct and asks a single question: what is the best outcome I can achieve in the next 60 seconds? And what is the best outcome I can achieve in the next 60 days? Often, those two answers are completely different, and the Stoic consistently chooses the longer view. This doesn't require my reaction, said or unsaid, is the choice to play the longer game. It is not passivity, it is strategy, elevated to philosophy. If this is landing for you, if these ideas are doing something inside you, I want you to hit subscribe right now. We go this deep on every video. Stoic philosophy for the actual battles of actual life. That's what this channel is for. Response 7. Thank you for telling me. This is the hardest one, not because it requires the most linguistic sophistication. It's only 4 words, but because it requires the deepest philosophical grounding. To mean, to actually mean. Let me tell you about a practice Marcus Aurelius describes in Meditations Book 1, the section where he lists the people who shaped him and what he learned from each of them. He thanks his philosophy teacher, Rusticus, for showing him that his character needed improvement and discipline. He thanks his adoptive grandfather for teaching him to be gentle and meek. He thanks a man named Sextus for being a pattern of gravity and showing him the idea of living conformably to nature. What's remarkable about this list is its honesty. Marcus is not thanking people who made his life easy. He is thanking people who made him better, which are often not the same people at all. The Stoics practiced a discipline called amor fati, the love of fate, the embrace of what happens rather than the resistance to it. Nietzsche borrowed this concept from the Stoics and made it famous, but its roots are Stoic to the bone. Thank you for telling me is amor fati. In conversation, it is the recognition that critical feedback, unwelcome truths, even hostile criticism, all of it contains, somewhere inside, information, data about how you're perceived, about what you might be missing, about the gap between your self-image and the image you project. The Stoics were not sentimental about this. They did not believe every criticism was valid. Epictetus was clear: you evaluate feedback with reason. But he was equally clear that the impulse to dismiss feedback, to protect yourself from it, to react with hostility to anyone who offers it, is one of the most reliable signs of a person who has stopped growing. Seneca wrote in one of his most beautiful letters, "Gather and save the thoughts which may help you in time of emergency. When a day has been spent well, when no pleasure has tempted me to go wrong, I say to myself, this day is mine, a day is yours, when you have gathered what it offered, including the difficult things, the uncomfortable things, the things that required you to say, thank you for telling me, and mean it. There is a version of you that never has to scramble for words again, not because you have a list of clever responses memorized, but because you've internalized something deeper, that you are not your reputation. You are not other people's opinions. You are not your worst moment or your most embarrassing mistake. You are, as Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself at the end of a long day, as Emperor of Rome, a soul governing a body, and from that position, a soul clear and grounded, governing itself. No word, no provocation, no human being on earth can silence you because you were never making noise in the first place. You were thinking, let me bring this full circle. We started in the dark with a candle flame, and I asked you to imagine what it would feel like to never be knocked off balance by another person's words again. We've covered 7 responses tonight. Not tricks, not weapons, but philosophical positions. 1. I may be wrong. The courage of intellectual humility. 2. Silence. The power of a response that doesn't need words. 3. That's an interesting perspective. The firewall of genuine curiosity. 4. Let me think about that. The dignity of deliberate reason. 5. You might be right. The openness that disarms opposition. 6. This doesn't require my reaction. The freedom of strategic withdrawal. 7. Thank you for telling me. The deepest Stoic discipline of all. Now, and I want to be honest with you here, as I try always to be, on this channel, these are not responses that become yours by watching a video. They become yours through practice, through what Epictetus called ascesis, discipline training, the daily exercise of the philosophical muscle. Marcus Aurelius didn't write the Meditations because he'd mastered Stoicism. He wrote it because he was still practicing every day, despite being emperor, despite being surrounded by war, corruption, plague, and loss. He wrote it to hold himself accountable to the person he was trying to become. I want to suggest something for you right now, tonight. Pick one of these 7 responses, just one, and try it genuinely once tomorrow. In the most ordinary context you can find, not in a crisis, just in a regular moment where you feel the old pull to react quickly, defensively, emotionally. Try the Stoic response instead, and come back here and tell me what happened. That's what this channel is for, not just to learn about Stoicism, but to live it. If this video gave you something today, a thought, a shift, even just a question, please share it with one person in your life who could use it. That single act of sharing is how philosophy has always survived, person to person, idea to idea, generation to generation. Hit the like button, not because algorithms matter, but because it tells me this kind of depth is what you want more of. If you're not yet subscribed to Wisdom of the Stoics, now is the time. We release new videos regularly, and every one of them goes this deep. Every one of them is built for the real challenges of a real life. And in the comments, I genuinely want to know, which of these 7 responses do you think will be hardest for you to actually practice? Not hardest to understand, hardest to live. That's the real question. I'll be in the comments. Until next time, stay grounded, stay rational, and remember what Marcus Aurelius told himself. On the mornings when the world felt heaviest, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength.